Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I am Brenna. I'm the Director of Education here at Test Innovators. And our webinar today is focused on everything that you need to know about preparing with limited time for the SSAT. This webinar will be recorded throughout. Feel free to type any questions you have in the comments. And if we have time at the end, I'll answer those questions. And I'll also review any questions that we don't get to after the webinar and respond to everyone who wrote in. I know that we may have many different kinds of people here today, maybe a parent, student, family, someone who works with a school that we work with, administrator, tutor, or more. If you have any questions that are specific to your situation, please don't hesitate to contact us after the webinar as well. So let's begin with an introduction to who we are. Test Innovators, we're the leading test prep platform for the SSAT and the ISEE. We've helped over 60,000 students get into the most selective schools. And these are just a few of the schools that students who've used our platform have been admitted to. And based on that experience, years of helping students with test prep, we know that standardized test taking is a skill that you can master. These tests are very different from other types of tests that students take. And like all skills, you have to learn and practice in order to improve. And once you've mastered the skill, that's when you're best able to demonstrate all of your knowledge effectively on the test, which is our goal. Additionally, advances in technology have made it far easier to prep for the test. Technology allows students to quickly identify strengths and weaknesses, and then it gives the best tools to prepare efficiently and effectively. And those two tenets form the foundation of the tools and resources that we've developed to help students prepare for the SSAT. And they also inform the strategies, which I'll be sharing with you in today's webinar. And these strategies come from a few different places. They come from working with admissions departments at schools, feedback from our students and network of tutors, and also from data collected in our system. And some of the most important data that we collect are official SSAT test scores and admissions results. We've compiled that data and made it available, and I'll include a link to that resource along with the recording of this webinar. This is really important because knowing what scores make you a competitive applicant at your target schools gives you the context and information you need as you're going into this application process. So this is an example of our school data. And if your student is interested in the school, you can see at a glance that scores in the yellow or green bands are considered competitive. Of course, there are many parts to the application that influence admissions decisions, and that is very important to remember when you're thinking about your SSAT scores. But this can help give you a good benchmark of the SSAT scores that we have found make students competitive applicants. And then for students who work with the Test Innovators platform, we even take this a step further. We put your practice test scores in the context of your target schools so that you can quickly see how you compare. So in this example, for the first school on the students list, the practice scores are looking really good for the verbal and reading sections. Those are both in the green zone. That's those black 73 and 72, but they have some work to do in math for the quantitative sections. And now here's the same student, same scores, but a different school. And you can see quickly that the students' practice scores aren't quite competitive yet for this school, and they have some work to do before the official test. So let's talk about preparing for that test. Today I'm going to start by taking you through an overview of the test content that you'll see. We'll talk about test strategies that apply to the whole test, and then we'll go through each section, highlighting strategies specific to each of them. And that will include talking about the SSAT essay and why it's so important. Since our focus today is on preparing with limited time, I'll give you some good, hard-hitting strategies that have the greatest impact when you have just limited time left to prepare. So let's get started. Beginning with the test. Schools use the SSAT to assess whether a student is a good fit at their school. A big piece of that is looking at how they'll handle the academics. Those are generally the scores. And then something that you may not know is that schools are also looking to get to know students through their writing, which is where the SSAT essay comes into play. And I'll talk more about that later. The test has 5 sections. There's a verbal section, a reading section, 2 quantitative or math sections, and then the essay. It can be taken multiple times, and whenever possible, our recommendation is to sign up for 2 testing dates. Now, admittedly, at this point, there are not many options left. So some of you may have already taken the official test at least once, some of you may not have. The remaining test dates are the January 6th test date and then the February 3rd test date. Since most schools have application deadlines in mid-January, you may not be able to use this February test date. If you're considering using the February test date, I highly recommend that you contact any schools that you're interested in applying to and find out exactly when their most firm deadline for receiving SSAT scores is, as sometimes they can be flexible with that. And lastly, the SSAT is administered on paper, which just means that a quick reminder to be careful with your bubble sheet, and practicing that skill before you go and take the official test is a really good idea so that you don't make any mistakes that can be time consuming on test day. There are 3 levels to the test. There's the elementary level, which is for application to grades 4 and 5, the middle level, which is for application to grades 6 through 8, and then upper level, which is for application to grades 9 through 12. And scoring is normative according to the grade that you're applying to. So although students are taking the same test that older students may be taking, for instance, if you're applying to grade 9, you're taking the same test that someone applying to grade 12 is, which means that you may be seeing content that may be above what you've encountered in school thus far. However, you're only going to be compared to students your own age. So one of the things that you can feel more confident about is the fact that if you're seeing a question that just seems completely out of what you've possibly learned about in school yet, probably most other students your age are feeling the same way about that question. So some quick details about the middle and upper levels of the test. It is 2 hours and 35 minutes altogether. There are 2 breaks during the test. So there's a 5-minute break after the writing sample, which is the first section, and then there's a 10-minute break after the reading section, which is the 3rd section of the test. And altogether, you answer 150 multiple choice questions as well as the writing prompt. And for all of those multiple choice questions, you have 5 answer choices. For the elementary level of the test, it's a little bit of a shorter test, so it's just 1 hour and 35 minutes. You get 1 break during the test. It's a 15-minute break that you take after the 2nd section, which is the verbal section. And altogether, you have 88 questions, and instead of a text word essay prompt, you have a picture prompt that you write a story about. And same idea, multiple choice questions that all have 5 answer choices. So now that you know a bit about the test, let's talk about test prep strategy. And there are many factors that go into determining your preparation plan. And those start with how well you know the material initially, how much time you have to prepare, which for most of you is probably not a lot, what your current time management skills are, whether you'll be able to take the test a second time. These are all factors that you'll consider as you come up with your preparation plan. Since everyone has limited time right now, we'll be focusing on strategies for getting ready for the test when you don't have a lot of time to prepare. Regardless of the answers to all of those questions, the first step in every preparation process is always to take a full-length practice test or benchmark. And taking that practice test, no matter how close it is to your official test date, will give you familiarity with the test style, difficulty, and content so that you know what to expect and you're not seeing it for the first time when you sit down to take the official test. It will also allow you to identify your strengths and weaknesses so that you know how to focus the preparation time that you do have. And some of the things that you'll be looking for in the results of that practice test will be if there were concepts that you didn't know, if you managed your time effectively, if you used elimination strategies well, etc. So where do you find these full-length practice tests, which are your starting point? You can certainly find full-length practice tests at Test Innovators, at other testing centers, plenty of sites around the web. Some important things that you'll want to look for in whichever test you do use. First of all, you want to ensure that the test is an accurate reflection of current test material, that you have access to quick scoring so you have the information about how you did immediately. And it's also great if there's an online testing option so that you have timing data, since time management can be such a critical part of this test. For example, with our platform, we show you exactly how you allocated time on every section. So what this is showing you right now The x-axis is showing the duration of the section, and you have on the y-axis it shows each of the questions, and you can see how long you took on each question over the duration of the section. So with this student, we can see that they went through every question of the section, and then they returned and checked their work for most of the questions. And insights like these are critical to help students become effective test takers and foster a reflective process for their learning. So let's talk about the two important strategies that apply across the entire test that you'll certainly want to know about. And the first of those relates to the wrong answer penalty. So on the SSAT, for both middle and upper levels of the test, this is not true for the elementary level, students lose a quarter point for wrong answers. So correct answers, you're given 1 point, blank answers, 0 points, and minus a quarter point for each incorrect answer. Clearly, it's important for students to be aware of this penalty, as the scoring model is different from that of most in-school tests. Our recommendation is for students to answer every question. Simplifying test strategy improves confidence, and especially any time that you've eliminated any answer choices, you've increased your chances of earning points by guessing. The second overall strategy to implement is the time management strategy. Using your time effectively on the SSAT is critical. Every correct answer gives you the same number of points. So your goal is to answer as many questions correctly as you possibly can. You don't want to waste valuable time on a hard question when instead you could be answering 3 easy questions correctly in the same amount of time. So what you'll do is you'll start by grouping questions by difficulty, easy, medium, and hard questions. So what that means is for each question, you're going to ask yourself, do I know how to do this? If the answer is yes, absolutely, that's an easy question. If the answer is probably, if I had enough time, that's a medium question. And then if the answer is I really don't know, I maybe don't even know some of the words that it's talking about in this question, that's a hard question and the last thing that you're going to spend time on. So in your first pass through each section, you're just going to answer the easy questions, the ones that you absolutely know how to do. You're going to mark the medium questions, the ones that you think you probably could do if you had enough time. Those ones you'll come back to later. And the hard questions, you're going to skip, the ones that you really don't know how to do. After you've done that for every question, you'll go back to the questions that you had marked, those medium questions, and answer those. And only if you have time remaining after that should you try the hard questions that you had skipped. One very important thing to note, as you may be skipping questions, is to be very careful with your bubble sheet. Make sure that every time you answer a question, you're bubbling in the answer to the question that you are on. So now let's go into the sections. So we'll start with the verbal section. For the middle and upper levels of the test, there are 60 questions to answer in 30 minutes. Elementary level, you have 30 questions to answer in 20 minutes. And these sections have 2 types of questions. The first half will always be synonyms, and the second half will be analogies. And the synonyms questions look something like this. You're given a single word, and then you have to choose the best synonym from among the 5 answer choices. And this is about the level of difficulty you might expect to see on the upper level of the test. Your strategy for synonyms questions is always to start by covering up the answer choices. Don't even look at them. What you're going to do first is come up with your own answer. And the idea there is that way you're much less likely to be tricked by the test writers. The most important thing, especially with limited time to prepare, is to make sure that for every question that you know how to do, so a synonym that you know, you want to ensure that you get the correct answer. So think of your own answer first. That way, if there's an answer choice that may be close in idea, but it does not actually match the definition or core meaning of the word, you'll be far less likely to be tricked by it and end up picking it. And so then after that, find the answer choice that's closest to yours. And the other important note with that is to always make sure that you read every single one of those 5 answer choices. Even if you find a word that seems like it might be a fine synonym, that's answer choice B, make sure you still read the remaining 3 answer choices, as one of those may in fact be a better or closer synonym. So always make sure you read all the answer choices so that you don't miss the best answer. Occasionally, in fact frequently, you'll probably run into some words that you don't know. especially if you're on the younger end of any of these groups of students taking each of the levels of the test. There's very challenging vocabulary, and you're likely to run into some words that you're not familiar with. When you don't know a word, here are your strategies. Start by trying to break it apart. See if you recognize parts of the word, maybe you know them from other words that you know, and see if you can use that to figure out what the word might mean, or at least eliminate some wrong answers so that you can make an educated guess. Think if you've ever heard that word before. Maybe you're not sure what it means, but you may know what context people use this word in. Again, that can help you eliminate wrong answer choices and then make an educated guess. And last, if you really don't have anything, you don't know the word, you can't break it apart, and you don't know what context it would be used in, see if you can come up with a charge for the word. So charge the word. Give it a plus or a minus. And occasionally words are neutral, so they will be in between those two. So say, is this a good word? Is it positive? Does it seem like a good thing? Or negative? It seems like not a good thing. And a good way to think about that is this a word that perhaps is descriptive, you would want it to be used to describe you? If you think you would, that's a positive word. If you think you wouldn't, that's a negative word. Then do that for all of the answer choices, and the charges should match. So if the given word got a positive sign, then the correct answer choice must also get a positive sign. If the given word had a negative sign, then the correct answer choice must also have a negative sign. That way you can eliminate answer choices that must be incorrect and make an educated guess. Studying vocabulary can be a good idea, but oftentimes really just for students who have more time to prepare. So if you have under 2 weeks, your best bet is really just to practice those strategies we just talked about and make sure that you can implement them effectively on test day. If you happen to have 2 weeks or more to prepare, studying vocabulary is also a good idea. Make sure the vocabulary you use is at the appropriate level. And additionally, learning roots can be beneficial since roots can be applied to many different words. After you study words, do make sure that you practice with actual test-style questions and develop all of the good test-taking habits that we just talked about in those strategies. So the second half of the verbal section are analogies, and students on the middle and upper will answer 30 analogy questions that look like this after they get through the synonyms portion of the verbal section. And the strategy for analogy questions is really to hone the ability to find the relationship between the first pair of words by forming a phrase or sentence that connects the two, and then apply that relationship to the second pair of words to see which one fits. So for instance, with this example, we have communication is to telephone as storage is to what? The phrase that connects the first two words of this analogy is a telephone is something that is used for communication. So applying this relationship to the second pair, we're looking for something that is used for storage. What is something that is used for storage? A locker is something that is used for storage, so C looks like that's our correct answer. To fully delineate that strategy, you'll always start on analogies by finding the relationship between the first pair of words, then applying that relationship to the second pair of words, and then selecting the answer choice for which that relationship holds. Some tips, things to keep in mind as you're looking at analogies. Order does matter. So talk is to shout is not the same thing as shout is to talk. So make sure that the answer choice you pick matches the order of the original pair of words. Also, pay attention to parts of speech. These should match between the given analogy and the correct answer choice. And last, as for the synonyms, word charges can often help, especially if some of the words in the analogy or the answer choices may be unknown. See if you can give them word charges. Again, these should match from the given pair of words to the correct answer choice. It can be helpful to know the types of relationships that you might be looking for in analogies. So let's talk about some of the most common ones. There are synonyms analogies, so where the two words mean the same thing. Antonyms, where they mean opposite things, loud is to quiet. Degree analogies are ones where one of the things is a greater form or a lesser form of the other. So stomp is to tiptoe. Stomp is the greater form of walking. Tiptoe is the lesser form of walking. You can have cause and effect analogies. Rain can cause a flood. definition or purpose. So if I give you the definition or purpose of a certain object, mop is to clean. That purpose of a mop is to clean. Part to whole. So if we have part of a whole thing, a chapter is part of a book. Type or kind. So here you usually have some sort of broader category that something else fits into. So for instance, an ape is a kind of primate. And then characteristics. So we can give the characteristic of a certain thing. Soda is bubbly. In terms of limited time preparation, analogies are a really good place for improvement in a short period of time. Where the synonyms section relies heavily on knowledge, analogy questions mostly just require a new skill. Many students haven't encountered analogy questions like these much prior to the SSAT. They have to learn how to form the bridge between the first pair of words in the analogy and then apply that to the second pair. The best thing you can do to improve on analogies is to learn that strategy and then practice it as many times as you can. Do as many analogy questions as possible, practicing forming that bridge, and then verifying that you chose the correct answer. With that, let's jump into the quantitative sections. So the SSAT middle and upper levels have 2 quantitative sections, 25 questions each, 30 minutes to answer those 25 questions. On the elementary level, there's just 1 quantitative section, and you have 30 minutes to answer 30 questions. And the subjects that you'll see at every level of the SSAT, they always rely heavily on a strong foundation in arithmetic. So you'll want to be comfortable with addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, with positive, negative numbers, fractions, decimals, all of these. Especially for the middle and upper levels of the test, many questions will also require strong algebra skills. So you'll have to work with variables to solve equations, to simplify expressions, to solve word problems. And then you'll also see some questions on topics from geometry, probability, or statistics. Practice tests are always the best way to get a sense of the types of questions you could be asked on each of these subjects and to determine what you should review or study to have a good foundation in those subjects going into the test. Some of the questions on the SSAT can look very different from questions that students have seen before, and getting comfortable with those is really important so they don't make you freeze up when you get to the official test. And this question is about the level of difficulty or type of question you might see on the upper level of the test. And it says that if n is between 0 and 1, which of the following is the greatest? This question might start out looking pretty hard or abstract or conceptual to many students. However, what if we just pick a value? If n equals 1/2, suddenly this question looks a lot less daunting. Each of these answer choices is relatively easy to calculate, and I can simply find out which of them is the greatest. The first thing to do in preparing for the SSAT math sections is to familiarize yourself with the test. And this is especially true, again, when you have limited time to prepare. Make sure you know what to expect and that there will be no surprises when you get to the official test. The next step is to review any content that you have seen before but may not remember well. Sometimes topics on the test may be concepts that you haven't covered in school for quite a while, since it's covering all of your math education up until whatever grade you're in, which may be many years. So reviewing any of those areas is also a really good place to start, since it usually doesn't take as long to brush up on those. If you only have a short amount of time to prepare, generally less than 2 weeks, as is probably the case for most of you, just stop there. Learn how to recognize the questions that you have no familiarity with, and then skip those just to make sure that you have time to spend on all of the questions that you do know how to approach. And then only for those of you who may have additional time to prepare, will it really be valuable to learn some of the concepts or vocabulary that you may not have encountered yet in school. And as always, anytime you're learning new content, make sure that you're practicing so that you're able to implement everything you learned successfully on the test. The first step in doing well on any math question is always to read the question carefully. You want to avoid making careless errors or calculating the wrong thing. So underline the important words and numbers as you read through the question. Pay attention to the units that are used in the question so that those always match throughout as you're solving. Draw pictures to help you keep track of the information that you're being given, and always check what you're trying to find at the end of the problem, and be sure to verify that after you're done solving. Write all of your work down to make sure that you're less likely to make mistakes if you are actually writing it all down instead of trying to keep track of it in your head. You'll keep your thoughts better organized, and you'll be better able to check your work later if you come back to look at that problem. As I said, at the end of every question, check what you're supposed to find, verify that's what you actually found. And then a few strategies that are really helpful, especially for questions that may look a bit daunting. And we, in fact, just use one of these. But one of the most powerful tools at your disposal is estimation. Never underestimate this one. So on questions where maybe the calculations seem pretty challenging, you may not be exactly sure how to do all of them, or it may just be time consuming to do all of them. Think right at the beginning of the question about how big the right answer should be. Should it be positive or negative? Should it be bigger or smaller than any of the numbers that are given in the question? Use your estimations to help eliminate answer choices. And sometimes that will even be enough to find the correct answer. Simply doing some clever estimation at the beginning will save you a lot of time and effort later on. Also, you can sometimes use the answer choices to work backwards as opposed to doing everything from scratch from the question. You know that one of the answer choices has to be correct. So you can plug in the answer choices when you aren't sure how to solve a problem and substitute those whenever possible. And then this last strategy is the one that we just used for the question we were looking at, where we had a variable that was unknown, but we had a range. Pick values for unknowns if it helps to make the problem more concrete and thus less challenging to solve. As I said with the verbal section, with limited time to prepare, strategies are one of the best places for improvement with just short time. Learn the good test-taking habits and strategies that I just described in those previous slides, and then practice implementing them so that they're second nature when you get to the official test. And with that, let's talk about the reading section. For the middle and upper levels of the test, you have 40 questions to answer in 40 minutes. You have 8 reading passages. And the elementary level of the test, you have 28 questions to answer in 30 minutes. Even more than any of the other sections, time management can be very difficult for the reading section. You have to both read the passages and answer all of the questions. So if you have trouble reading quickly enough to get through these potentially long passages and answer all of the questions, practice skimming the passages to find the most important information. But also know that it is generally better to get through most of the test, taking your time and answering every question carefully and correctly, than it is to rush through the entire section and therefore end up missing most of the questions. So do some practice with this and find the balance that works best for you. A few strategies that can help you across the reading section are to always, each time you read a passage, ask yourself, so what, after you finish reading it, and put in your own words, whether it's on paper or just in your head, what you think the main point of the passage was. And that will help you with every question on the passage. It will shape how you find correct answer choices and eliminate answer choices that aren't in line with the point of the passage. And then the most fundamental rule of reading comprehension is that there is always evidence in the passage for every correct answer. The passage is your source of truth when it comes to this, and you should always be referencing the text to find the correct answer because it will always be in the text. For every question, look back through the passage and find evidence, specific line numbers that support the answer choice you think is correct. And if you can't find it, it's not the correct answer. So the answer choice has to exactly be in there. If there's even a part of it that doesn't fit, then that's not the correct answer. And you should look to see if there's a different one that may be a reformulation of what's actually in the passage. And last, as with the verbal section where on the synonyms, I told you to think of your own answer before you looked at the answer choices. This is also true for reading. Again, there can be very tricky answer choices that may make you think that they seem kind of reasonable, but oftentimes if you just think of your own answer first and then find the answer choice that best matches what you came up with, you're much less likely to be tricked by the test writers. A couple answer choice strategies that you can apply that will help you with these questions. Watch out for extreme answer choices. So if you ever see the words only, always, never, none, best, worst, anything like that, those answers tend to be too extreme and beyond the scope of what the passage is saying. On the SSAT, essentially all of the passages are fairly moderate in their claims. So unless you can see those exact words in the passage, those are good answer choices to eliminate. General answer choices tend to be good, especially for main idea questions or questions that are trying to get at broader ideas in the passage. So always make sure that the answer choice you pick matches the scope of the question that you were asked. If it was a question that was about the whole passage, then the correct answer must also encapsulate the whole passage. You should avoid answer choices in particular that are too specific, that are really just talking about one small piece of the passage, whereas you're supposed to be looking for something that's a bit broader. When it comes to the last section of the SSAT, the writing sample that we haven't talked about, this is the one part of the test that is not multiple choice. So for this part of the test, you'll get 2 writing prompts, and depending on the test level, you may get a creative or an analytical prompt. Students then have 25 minutes to choose a prompt and write their response. And for the elementary level, you just have 15 minutes and you write a story based on a picture prompt. And this part of the test always gets a lot of questions because it's the only ungraded section of the test. Instead, a copy of the essay is sent to schools along with your test scores, and admissions departments use it as an indicator not only of students' writing ability, but also of how well they'll fit into the school community academically and personally. So while application essays can be edited extensively by your parent, tutor, sibling, friend, the SSAT essay is the one pure sample of a student's writing that schools will get. And that makes it a very important component of the SSAT because it demonstrates to schools a great deal about a student in terms of what they choose to write about and how well they express those thoughts. So some things that you'll want to keep in mind as you're writing your essay. Always start by outlining. This does not have to be a very formal outline, but you should always be brainstorming your ideas before you start writing your actual essay. So we'll start by talking about the more personal essay, slightly more traditional outlined, structured essay, and then we'll talk about creative writing as a story next. You should, in your outline, always decide on your main point and make sure that it answers the given essay prompt. It's important to demonstrate that you can stay focused and on topic. In your outline, you also should have the 2 or 3 points that will support your main idea, and then have good descriptive details and examples for those in each of your body paragraphs. So your introductory paragraph will introduce your main point, introduce your 2 or 3 supporting ideas for that main point. Those are then going to be the topic sentences of each of your body paragraphs, and then you'll bulk up those body paragraphs with details and examples, and then always end with a nice conclusion that sums up what you had to say. The most important part of the essay, though, is expressing yourself. Schools are trying to learn more about you and what you care about, so let them get to know you. Of course, through all of that, but excuse me, be sure to present yourself in the best possible light. You do want to avoid anything that could possibly be construed negatively by the reader. And then in the last few minutes of your essay, always save some time to edit your writing. You'll want to check your mechanics and make sure that you use correct spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and grammar. When it comes to creative writing, a lot of the essentials are the same. Outlining is still a good idea to help clarify and structure your thoughts. In your outline, you'll put the main idea of your story, who your characters are, what the primary central conflict of your story will be, how it will begin, and how you'll tie it all up at the end. Your story should absolutely have a beginning, middle, and end, and those should be separated into separate paragraphs. You should have a central conflict that happens in the middle of it, and then yes, you want to make sure that it gets tied off nicely at the end so that there's some resolution. Always have good descriptive details throughout to help make it come alive for your reader. And then, of course, as with the analytical or personal essay, expressing yourself is huge. You want to choose a story, characters, and events that say something about you and what's important to you. And then in the last few minutes of writing, again, edit what you wrote. Check your mechanics so that this piece of writing is as polished as possible and none of those small errors will stand out to an admissions department who is reading it. So now that we've finished going into detail about every section of the test, let's put it back in the context of your preparation plan. What you'll do is start by taking a full-length practice test. From there, you'll be able to identify your strengths and weaknesses and determine how you should best focus your time as you're going up to the official test date. You'll review your scores in the context of your target schools, and then begin the learning process. Learn the content and strategies that will be most impactful to you. And of course, you can always go back to this webinar recording and find the strategies for the sections that you may need the most help on. And then practice. Anytime you've learned a new strategy or a new skill, you should always practice it so that you're not implementing it for the first time when you get to the official test. Throughout the process, we're here to help, so you can visit our site at ssatpracticetest.com. And of course, don't hesitate to reach out. Here's my contact information as well as our support team contact information if you have any questions or we can help you in any way throughout the preparation process. And with that, let me take a look at some of the questions that have been coming in as I've been talking. Okay, so how long after the test until you get your scores back? Generally, it takes about 2 weeks. We're not the official testing body, so if you are looking for your scores or you've taken the test and want to see when you'll be able to access your scores, you should contact the official testing body, which is the SSAT. And you can also just go to their website and they have an online portal that generally you're able to log in and see your test scores. And as I said, it's about 2 weeks before you see your test scores. And then what if the question asked you to find the main idea in the reading section? Is it in the passage? Absolutely, great question, and yes, it most certainly is. And let's talk a little bit, since you asked, about strategy for main idea questions in particular. When it comes to main idea questions, you're right. That isn't a detail the same way some of those other reading comprehension questions are. So for the detail questions, what you're doing is you're going to that specific part of the passage where it talks about that and finding out what the passage says. So that will be the correct answer. For main idea questions, what you're doing is you're going back to the passage and saying, which of these answer choices is what most of the passage is about. So one way to think about it is you actually can think about sort of boxing the parts of the passage that talk about that, and then you can see which of them is the whole thing. So which of them encapsulates most of the passage. So if you find an answer choice that is in the passage, but maybe it's only 2 sentences in the passage or something like that, that's probably not the main idea, because you want the main idea to be what the whole passage is about. But yes, absolutely, if there isn't evidence, if there aren't line numbers in the passage that say that, that isn't the correct answer. So it certainly should be there. With the main idea, the only difference is that it should be there really a lot. And then I will give you just a minute here to see if any other questions are going to come in. And if not, again, feel free to reach out to us with any other questions. I have another question, which is, what does tone mean in the reading section? Also a very good question. So there are a whole set of questions. These are not the most frequent questions. There's probably 1 or 2 of them on any given reading section that you'll encounter. Maybe a couple more depending on the test day. And these ones are asking about the author's tone. And so it'll usually say, you know, is the author enthusiastic? Is the author critical? How does the author feel about this? So for those questions, what you're trying to get at is, how does the author talk about this? As opposed to what exactly the author says, you're looking at how does the author say it. So for this, the best words for you to look at are going to be adjectives tend to be a really good way to figure out how the author feels about something. So if they use a lot of really positive words, they say great, wonderful, influential, helpful, admirable, words like that, then we're going to be thinking, okay, the author feels really good about this. And then you're looking for an answer choice that reflects that, that says, ah, yes, the author seems to feel very positively about whatever the subject is. However, if you see a lot of words that are perhaps more critical, so they're saying, you know, harmful, detrimental, problematic, terrible, words like this, suddenly I'm going to start thinking the author maybe doesn't feel so positive about this, and I'll look for one of the answer choices with tone that says something that's a little bit more negative. And so using words like that can help you figure out what the author's tone might be. And if you can't find any of those, then you may be looking for a neutral word. Maybe the author is just presenting everything in a very factual way. So those are the kinds of things you're looking at. You're saying, is the author just telling me a lot of facts? Does the author have an opinion about this? Is the author trying to persuade me of something? And use their word choice to figure out which of those things is true. Okay, and then I have a question. You guys are enthusiastic about the reading section. So how to approach an inference question in the reading section. So where it says, from the passage, you can infer that, whatever it may be. So with these, actually, this comes back to the fundamental rule of reading comprehension, which is that you should use the passage, use the text as your reference point. So the correct answer is always in the text, and the most tempting thing that students can do that will lead them astray on inference questions is to choose to start extrapolating wildly, so jumping to conclusions based on what seems potentially reasonable from what the author had said or what the passage says. And if I can give you just one, if you only take away one thing about reading comprehension from this webinar, it is that you should absolutely not do that. Be very wary of jumping to conclusions, leaping to other ideas based on what's in the passage. Although that's a great thing to do in your English classes, potentially in school, is to have interpretations and discuss what different things it could possibly mean. Reading comprehension tends to be a lot more clear-cut than that. So if you don't see in the passage that it says whatever the answer choice is, it's probably not the right answer. And that is true for all of those questions, including those inference ones. All right, another great question. How early should you arrive for your test? Great question. It is a very good idea to get there a bit early. I generally think that putting in some buffer room for a couple things is always good. So put in some buffer room depending on how far away from your testing site you are. Make sure that you leave buffer room for your transportation time, because you never know what will happen if you'll hit some traffic or something else will come up and you don't want to be late for the test. And then of course, leave at least, half an hour of buffer room actually around the testing site itself to say, just make sure that you're sitting down, you have your paper and pencils, you're all ready to go. This question actually is the same as one I just answered, which was about inference. And this, I'm not quite sure what this question is asking. Something about dramatic choices better in tone questions. Maybe dramatic choices. Feel free to type that question again and clarify a little bit if you want to make sure that that gets answered. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. What do schools think if you take the test twice? Another really good question. This depends a little bit on the school, and it also depends a little bit on how exactly you do this. So if you do take the test more than once, I actually recommend not sending scores until you have seen your scores for each of the tests. And that's what you can do. You can just wait till you see the scores and then send the scores that you prefer. So if you do better on the test one of the days, you can just send those. If you do send more than one set of scores, again, it depends a bit on the school, and one thing that you can do is actually just contact the school and see what they say about this. But generally what many schools will do is they will look at both of them and find sort of the highest scores and know that that's what you're capable of. Plenty of schools will do that. Essentially what is considered like a super score, so they'll take the highest score of each section. Other schools might just fully consider both of them. So they might look through every score from each of them. So if you have some lower scores on certain sections from one test date, then certainly schools would be able to see those. And that the question was specific to the elementary level. That's sort of broadly applicable. I would say that it's true for both. With younger students, the one thing that is also true is that schools will be aware that with younger students, the test-taking process is probably a little bit more unfamiliar. And therefore, if, for instance, your first test didn't go as well and the next test goes better, that's somewhat to be expected, since you probably haven't taken a lot of tests like this before. And with that, it looks like we don't have any other questions for right now. Feel free to reach out if you have any other questions that come up, and we're more than happy to answer them. Again, thank you for joining us today, and good luck to all of you on the test.